Hi, so I'm Chris Weld, and we're at the site of Berkshire Mountain Distillers. We are just into our second year of operation, and we're located in Sheffield, Mass, which is in the southwest corner of Massachusetts. The property that you're on now is a historic farm, and actually in the 1800s, where the distillery sits now, was a hotel that was built here to take advantage of the spring waters that flowed out of the ground off the mountain here. They were deemed to be therapeutic, curing everything from eczema to diabetes. And actually in 1901, they were selling about 3,000 gallons of the water a week to New York City, touting it as a cure-all for whatever ailed you. So water being the cornerstone of spirits, typically about 60% of what's in the bottle, sort of sparked the idea of it would be a great place to start a distillery. Currently, we make a rum, 2 gins, a vodka, and bourbon. The bourbon and other whiskeys we'll be doing a rye are grain-based, as is the gin and vodka. The rum is a molasses-based rum. So what I'm going to do is walk you through the process. Parts of it are very similar, and parts are different. Right now, we're doing grain-based stuff. We're doing the bourbon, which is essentially the same prep for a gin or a vodka, and it'll be the same prep for the ryes that we'll do, and we'll probably end up doing a single malt Scotch type whiskey. We can't call it Scotch in this country. On the barn are 3 grain silos. We have a total storage of about 20 tons of grain. So 70% of the grain bill going into the bourbon is corn. The corn comes out of a grain silo. It comes into what's called a mixer grinder. It gets ground up through a hammer mill on that. It's driven by the tractor. So augured out of a grain silo, through the mixer grinder, and then augured into a direct fire kettle here that cooks the corn. And basically you have to boil the corn for about 20 minutes, and that helps break down the cell wall. It goes through a process called saccharification and makes the sugar available for the yeast to ferment. So we just came from the kettle outside. The mash has been pumped into the mash tun here that has a countercurrent heat exchanger. It's basically a large coiled copper piece that cold water comes in and comes out very hot. So cooling the mash down to a temperature a little bit below 160 Fahrenheit, and then we start adding the rye and the barley malt. And at this point, the enzymes in those grains are active. They help break down the starches in it, making them available for the yeast to ferment. All ends up in one of these fermenters. We have 4 of them. 2 of them are about 1,000 gallons, and 2 of them are about 600 gallons. They're all stainless steel. After they're done fermenting, we will pump through the bottom and into the still to get ready for distilling. Temperature is very important for the fermentation process. If you vary too much, you end up producing what are called off alcohols, and this actually can taint the flavor of your end product. You get more of what are called congeners, which are different alcohols other than just ethanol. So this is the still. It's actually a pretty large still. It's about an 800-gallon still, 825 gallons. But distillation is actually a pretty simple process, and it takes advantage of the differences in boiling points or volatility of alcohol and water. So when you distill, you end up heating the wash or the beer slowly to a temperature. So then what happens is it runs through these column systems. The vapor comes into the condenser, which is called the shotgun condenser. It's filled with about 75 copper pipes that are filled with cold water from the spring from below that flows up through the condenser, and the hot vapors coming in through the top of the condenser, and they pass each other, exchanging heat. So the vapor gives off its heat to the water, condenses by the time it hits the bottom of the condenser, comes out as product. The hot water overflows by gravity out of the top of the condenser, and we have a 1,000-gallon insulated milk tank that we store that hot water in. So the next day when we go to do our next mash outside, we have water that's 150 degrees. We don't have to start from scratch heating up water from 50 degrees from the spring temperature. So it's a nice green aspect of this. The other thing that we do with this water is in the wintertime, we'll leave that full overnight, and we'll leave the still full overnight. So we have about 1,800 gallons of hot water or mash in the barn that basically acts as our heat source in the wintertime, so we don't have to use other outside heat sources. Okay, so this is condensed product. It's coming over cool. So we're on the end of a bourbon run here, and typically throughout the process you can check the proof on it. So this is basically a hydrometer that's set up to check the proof, and right now, we're right around 150 or so. Almost all rum is aged in used whiskey barrels. We use Woodford bourbon barrels. They send them up the day after they empty them. We never get soured barrels. They're like the bourbon, so it's a good blend. Bourbon barrels also go down to Mexico for tequila. Tequila is usually aged in bourbon barrels, as is Scotch. So for now, we've been aging our rum in Woodford's bourbon barrels. We're starting to age a lot of bourbon now, and by law, bourbon has to go into a virgin barrel. So rum you could throw into a virgin barrel if you wanted. It ages faster, but it's a lot more planky tasting. So the bourbon that we're doing now goes into virgin barrels, and when we empty out our bourbon barrels, we'll probably start using those to age our rum in, so we don't have to buy them from Woodford. So then we bottle everything. It gets labeled after it's bottled and put into the box. And we try and stay, a month ahead on products so that we always have product and not run out. So we've kind of gone through from the beginning of mashing the grains or the fruit or molasses for the rum, through the fermentation, distillation, aging, filtering, bottling, and at this point it's just trying to get the word of the brand out there and building the brand and getting brand recognition. And we've had wonderful reception and feedback on the product, and a gold medal on the vodka. So we have a grain-based vodka. We've got a molasses-based sipping rum that is very complex and full-bodied and drinks a lot like a cognac. We have 2 gins now. The first gin is 7 botanicals that I mentioned and is 80 proof. The second gin is 14 botanicals, distilled over the botanicals 3 times, and is 86 proof.